The massive space station hung in the darkness like a silver jewel. It was bigger than most cities, spinning slowly around the planet Kepler Prime. Inside its gleaming halls, the most powerful beings in the galaxy were gathering for an emergency meeting. Dr. Sarah Chen walked through the long corridors, her footsteps echoing off the metal walls. She was small compared to most of the aliens around her. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a plain blue uniform with the Earth symbol on her chest. She looked calm, but her heart was beating fast. Today, humanity would learn its fate. The meeting hall was enormous. Thousands of seats rose up in circles, each one filled with a different type of alien. The Vorthak looked like living crystals, their bodies catching and reflecting light in rainbow patterns. The Zephyrians moved as one group, their thoughts connected like a giant mind. The Draknari sat straight and proud, their scales gleaming like armor. Sarah took her place in the defendant's chair at the center of it all. Above her, holographic displays showed images of human colonies, human ships and human settlements spreading across the galaxy. The emergency session of the Galactic Council will now begin, announced the chief speaker, a tall being made of living metal. We are here to discuss the human problem. The humans had been in space for only 200 years, but they had already caused trouble. They built colonies on empty worlds without asking permission. They shared their technology with primitive species that the Council had deemed not ready. Worst of all, they treated every intelligent being as an equal, no matter how advanced or powerful their species was. Humans refused to follow galactic law, said Ambassador Klix of the Draknari, his voice like grinding stone. They do not respect the natural order. Strong species should rule, weak species should serve. This is how the galaxy has worked for 10,000 years. The crystalline Vorthak representative chimed like breaking glass. Humans give weapons to species that should remain primitive. They upset the balance we have carefully maintained. They spread chaos wherever they go, added the Zephyrian collective voice. Their individualistic thinking is like a virus, making other species question the hive mind. Sarah listened to the accusations pile up. Every charge was true in a way. Humans did ignore the rules about who could colonize which worlds. They did share technology freely. They did treat a primitive farming species the same way they treated an advanced spacefaring civilization. But Sarah didn't see these as crimes. She saw them as humanity doing what felt right. Dr. Chen, the chief speaker's voice boomed across the hall. How do you answer these charges? Sarah stood up slowly. The hall fell silent. Thousands of alien eyes watched her. Honored council members, she began, her voice steady and clear. My species is guilty of everything you've accused us of. We do ignore your territorial laws. We do share our knowledge freely. We do treat all thinking beings as equals. A rumble of anger swept through the hall. Some aliens hissed. Others made clicking sounds of disapproval. Sarah continued. But we don't see these as crimes. We see them as doing what's right. Every species deserves a chance to grow and learn. Every being deserves respect no matter where they come from or how advanced they are. Foolish human thinking, growled Ambassador Klix. The strong must control the weak. This is natural law. With respect, Ambassador, Sarah replied, that's not natural law. That's just what the strong tell themselves to feel better about keeping others down. The hall exploded in angry voices. Aliens stood up shouting in a dozen different languages. The chief speaker had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. When the noise died down, the chief speaker's eyes glowed red with anger. Humanity has shown complete disregard for galactic order. The council has reached a decision. Sarah felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her face calm. Humanity will be taught their proper place in the galaxy, the chief speaker declared. We will release the void spawn. Gasps echoed through the hall. Even the proudest alien representatives looked frightened at the mention of that name. Sarah had heard of the void spawn in whispered stories. It was a creature of pure nightmare, something so terrifying that entire species would surrender just at the mention of its name. The void spawn has broken the will of every species that dared challenge the council's authority, the chief speaker continued. It will show humanity what happens to those who refuse to know their place. The creature had been locked away in the deepest parts of the station for centuries. No one had seen it and remained sane. Its very presence could drive minds to madness. It was the Council's ultimate weapon, used only when all other methods failed. However, the chief speaker added, the Council is not without mercy, Dr. Chen. You may make one final request before the creature is released. Sarah thought for a moment. Around her, aliens waited to see what humanity's representative would ask for. Would she beg for mercy? Would she ask for more time? Would she try to negotiate? I would like to meet with the creature, Sarah said simply. The hall fell dead silent. Even the chief speaker seemed stunned by the request. You wish to meet with the void spawn? He asked as if he couldn't believe what he'd heard. Yes, Sarah nodded. Before you use it to teach humanity a lesson, I'd like to speak with it personally. Nervous laughter rippled through the hall. Some aliens made sounds of disbelief. Others shook their heads at human stupidity. The creature will destroy your mind the moment you see it, warned Ambassador Clix. No being can look upon the void spawn and remain sane. Maybe, Sarah said calmly, but I'd still like to try. The chief speaker consulted with other council members in hushed tones. Finally, he turned back to Sarah. Very well, he announced. The council grants your request. You may meet with the void spawn before it is released upon your species. Perhaps witnessing its true horror will make you understand the futility of resistance. Sarah bowed her head respectfully. Thank you. As the council session ended, aliens began filing out of the hall. Many looked at Sarah with pity. Others seemed amused by human arrogance. A few appeared genuinely concerned for her sanity. Sarah remained in her seat as the hall emptied. She wasn't afraid exactly, but she was nervous. She had no idea what she would find when she met this creature. All she knew was that something about the situation felt wrong. The council spoke of the void spawn as if it were just a tool, a weapon to be used when needed. But tools didn't have minds. Weapons didn't think or feel. If this creature was intelligent enough to be used for intimidation, then it was intelligent enough to have thoughts and feelings of its own. And if it had thoughts and feelings, then maybe it could be reasoned with. Sarah stood up and walked toward the exit. In a few hours, she would come face to face with the most feared creature in the galaxy. She had no weapons, no special protection, and no plan beyond treating it with the same respect she would show any other thinking being. It might be the last decision she ever made. But as she walked through the empty corridors toward her quarters, Sarah felt oddly peaceful. Whatever happened next, she would face it the human way, with open mind and open heart. The galaxy was about to learn what that really meant. Deep beneath the Galactic Council station, in the lowest levels where few dared to go, something stirred in the darkness. The containment chamber was a perfect sphere made from the strongest materials in the galaxy. Energy barriers hummed around it, powered by 3 fusion reactors. Warning signs covered every surface in dozens of languages, all saying the same thing. Danger, void spawn containment, authorized personnel only. For 300 years, the chamber had been silent. Now red lights began flashing as sensors detected movement inside. Alarms started wailing throughout the lower levels. In the control room, 2 Draknari guards stared at their screens in horror. "It's moving," whispered the first guard, his scaled hand shaking as he reached for the emergency communicator. "That's impossible," said the second guard. "Nothing has disturbed it for centuries. Why would it wake up now?" They didn't know that far above them. The council had made their decision about humanity. The void spawn always seemed to sense when it would be needed. It was as if the creature could smell fear and conflict from anywhere in the galaxy. Inside the sphere, something massive shifted in the shadows. Eyes began opening, not just 2 eyes, but dozens of them, each one glowing like a dying star. The creature had no fixed shape. Sometimes it looked like a giant spider made of darkness. Other times it resembled a dragon with too many heads. Most often it was just a writhing mass of shadow and teeth that hurt to look at directly. The void spawn pressed against the energy barriers. Sparks flew as the containment field struggled to hold. More alarms joined the first ones. Emergency lights bathed the lower levels in pulsing red. "Call the council," shouted the first guard. "Tell them the creature is awakening." "They already know," replied the second guard, checking his messages. "They've authorized a release. The human is coming down to meet it first." Both guards stared at each other in disbelief. "A human?" the first guard asked. "They're sending a single human to face the void spawn?" "That's what the orders say. We're to escort Dr. Sarah Chen to Observation Room 7 in 2 hours. The second guard shook his head. "I've seen the creature's previous releases in the historical records. Entire armies of Draknari warriors went insane just from being in the same room. The Crystalline Collective once sent their strongest mind-shielded telepaths, and they're still in mental hospitals. What does one human think she can do? They didn't have long to wonder. The containment field flickered and failed. The void spawn poured out of its prison like liquid darkness. The two guards took one look at its true form and ran screaming down the corridor, their minds unable to process what they had seen. The creature flowed through the station's lower levels like a living nightmare. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, but the void spawn passed through solid metal as if it weren't there. Security teams rushed to respond, but they fled the moment they caught sight of the creature. Commander Thax, a veteran Dreknari warrior with 50 years of combat experience, led a squad of his best soldiers toward the breach. They were armed with the most powerful weapons in the station's arsenal and protected by mind shields designed to resist psychic attacks. None of it mattered. The moment Commander Thax saw the void spawn, his warrior's mind snapped like a dry branch. He fell to his knees, sobbing like a child as memories of every fear he'd ever felt came flooding back 1,000 times stronger. His soldiers didn't fare any better. The bravest fighters in the galaxy curled up on the floor, whimpering and calling for their mothers. The creature flowed past them without slowing down. It wasn't interested in breaking random minds. It had been summoned for a specific purpose. Word spread through the station faster than the creature itself. Aliens who had lived for centuries without knowing fear suddenly remembered what terror felt like. The proud Vorthak, beings of living crystal who thought themselves above emotions, found hairline cracks appearing in their bodies as primal panic took hold. The Zephyrian collective mind, which had been unified for thousands of years, began splitting into individual voices as each member of the hive tried to hide from the approaching nightmare. "Evacuate the diplomatic levels," ordered the chief speaker. "All non-essential personnel to the escape pods." But even as aliens fled in every direction, one human sat calmly in the diplomatic quarters, sipping tea and watching the chaos through reinforced windows. Dr. Sarah Chen had received word that the creature was coming to meet her. She could hear the alarms, the screaming, the sounds of panic echoing through the station, but she remained where she was in a comfortable chair in the observation lounge, waiting patiently. The other diplomatic representatives had tried to convince her to flee with them. "You don't understand," Ambassador Clix had said as he ran past her door. "The void spawn destroys minds just by being seen. Come with us." "Thank you for the concern," Sarah had replied politely. "But I said I wanted to meet it, and I meant it." Now she sat alone as the creature approached. Through the station's communication system, she could hear progress reports. "It's past level 15. Security Team 7 has been neutralized. All personnel evacuate to minimum safe distance." Sarah took another sip of her tea. She had chosen chamomile, something calming for what was likely to be a stressful conversation. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly. The lights flickered. Something large was moving in the corridor outside. Sarah set down her teacup and smoothed her uniform. Whatever was coming, she would meet it with dignity. The reinforced door, made from metal that could withstand a direct hit from a fusion bomb, crumpled like paper. Darkness poured into the room, bringing with it a presence so alien and terrifying that it should have driven any sane mind to madness. The void spawn filled the chamber, its form shifting and writhing, dozens of burning eyes fixed on the small human sitting calmly in her chair. Its psychic scream, designed to shatter minds and break spirits, echoed through the room with the force of a hurricane. Sarah looked up from her tea and studied the creature carefully. She should have been insane by now. Her mind should have been broken into 1,000 pieces. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if she were trying to solve an interesting puzzle. "Oh," she said softly, her voice filled not with terror but with genuine sadness. "You're hurt, aren't you?" The creature froze. In all its centuries of existence, no being had ever looked at it with anything but fear or hatred. But this human, this impossibly fragile little being, was looking at it with something the void spawn had almost forgotten existed. Compassion. For the first time in 300 years, the void spawn stopped screaming. The silence in the room was deafening. For the first time in centuries, the void spawn had stopped its terrible screaming. Its dozens of eyes, each one burning like a small star, focused on the human sitting calmly in her chair. Sarah Chen rose slowly from her seat, moving with careful, gentle motions. Any other being in the galaxy would have been driven mad by now, their minds shattered by the creature's psychic assault. But Sarah felt something entirely different. She felt sad. Looking at the writhing mass of shadow and teeth, she didn't see a monster. She saw pain. Ancient, terrible pain that had been building for so long it had become something else entirely. "I can see it now," Sarah said quietly, taking a small step forward. The creature's form rippled with confusion. "You're not really a weapon, are you? You're a survivor. Someone hurt you very badly, didn't they?" The void spawn made a sound that was part growl, part whimper. Its massive form shifted and twisted, as if it were trying to decide whether to attack or retreat. But it didn't move away from the approaching human. Sarah continued walking forward, her hands visible and empty. "My species has a saying, hurt people hurt people. When someone is in pain for a long time, sometimes they learn to pass that pain on to others. But we also believe that pain shared is pain halved." The creature's psychic emanations, which should have been overwhelming, felt to Sarah like a cold wind carrying whispers of loneliness and despair. She had expected to face a mindless beast. Instead, she found herself standing before something that had once been beautiful and kind, twisted by centuries of suffering into its current form. "You must be so tired," Sarah continued, now close enough to reach out and touch the creature if she wanted to. "How long has it been since someone looked at you without fear? How long since anyone saw you as more than just a tool for intimidation?" The void spawn's form began to change. The sharp edges softened slightly. Some of the burning eyes closed as if the creature were too exhausted to keep them all open. For just a moment, Sarah caught a glimpse of what it might have looked like before. Something graceful and luminous, like a being made of starlight. "Would you like to rest?" Sarah asked gently. "Just for a little while. You don't have to be scary right now. There's no one here but us." High above them, in the station's control center, aliens watched through security cameras in stunned disbelief. The most feared creature in the galaxy was actually listening to a human, not fleeing from her, not attacking her, listening. "This is impossible," whispered the chief speaker, his metallic voice crackling with static. "No being has ever communicated with the void spawn. It doesn't think. It only destroys." But on the screen, they could all see that the creature was thinking very much indeed. Its head, or what passed for a head in its shifting form, tilted to one side as it studied Sarah. Slowly, carefully, it began to lower itself toward the ground. Sarah extended her hand, palm up, the way she might approach a frightened animal. "I know you're afraid to trust anyone. I can feel how much you've been hurt. But I promise I won't hurt you. My name is Sarah. What's yours?" The question seemed to shock the creature. Its form rippled again, and for a moment Sarah could swear she saw surprise in those burning eyes. When was the last time anyone had asked the void spawn its name? When was the last time anyone had treated it as a thinking being rather than just a weapon? The creature made a sound, not a roar or a scream, but something almost like a sigh. Then, to everyone's amazement, it lowered its massive head toward Sarah's outstretched hand. The moment her fingers made contact with the creature's shadowy form, everything changed. A psychic connection formed between them. Not the brutal mental assault the creature usually projected, but something gentle and warm. Sarah found herself sharing memories and emotions with the being before her. She saw flashes of its past, a time when it had been something else entirely, something beautiful and peaceful. She saw laboratories filled with alien scientists, saw machines designed to cause pain, saw centuries of imprisonment and torture designed to break its spirit and reshape it into a weapon of terror. The creature had once been called the Luminar. Its species were beings of pure thought and energy, who traveled the galaxy as healers and peacemakers. They could calm conflicts with their presence, heal minds damaged by trauma, and bring understanding between different species. But the ancient Galactic Council had feared them. The Luminar's message of universal equality and their ability to inspire others to question authority made them dangerous to the established order. So the Council had captured the last of their kind and begun a program of systematic torture designed to turn their greatest strength, their ability to touch other minds, into a weapon of terror. For centuries, they had broken down the Luminar's natural compassion and rebuilt it as an instrument of fear. Every time the creature was released to terrorize a rebellious species, it hated itself a little more. Every mind it broke, every spirit it crushed added to its own suffering. Sarah felt tears running down her face as she experienced the creature's pain. Through their connection, the Luminar felt something it hadn't experienced in centuries, someone genuinely caring about its suffering. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered, her hand still touching the creature's shadowy form. "I'm so sorry they did that to you. You didn't deserve any of it." The Luminar made that sighing sound again, and Sarah realized it was crying, or trying to, as much as a being of living shadow could cry. Its form began to shift again, the harsh edges becoming softer, the burning eyes dimming to a gentler glow. "You showed them your true nature once, didn't you?" Sarah asked. "You tried to heal instead of harm. That's why they had to work so hard to break you. Your natural instinct was to help, not hurt." Around them, the chamber began to change. The psychic atmosphere, which had been thick with terror and despair, started to clear. A faint, warm light began to emanate from the creature's form. Not the harsh glare of its burning eyes, but something softer and more peaceful. For the first time in centuries, the Luminar began to remember what it had been before the pain, before the conditioning, before it became the void spawn. It began to remember what it felt like to bring comfort instead of fear. Sarah settled down on the floor beside the creature, no longer afraid. The Luminar's massive form curled around her protectively, like a parent sheltering a child. Its psychic emanations, instead of driving her mad, felt like a warm blanket wrapping around her mind. "Rest now," Sarah said softly, her hand gently stroking what might have been the creature's side. "You're safe. You don't have to be their weapon anymore." And for the first time in 300 years, the being that had been forced to become the void spawn closed all of its eyes and slept peacefully. In the control center above, the chief speaker stared at the screen in complete silence. The most feared creature in the galaxy was curled up like a house cat, sleeping contentedly beside a human who had shown it nothing but kindness. Everything they thought they knew about the universe had just changed. Sarah sat quietly beside the sleeping creature, her hand resting gently on its shadowy form. The psychic connection between them had grown stronger as the Luminar relaxed, and through it, she was learning the full truth about what had been done to this gentle being. The memories flowed like a dark river through their shared consciousness. Sarah saw the Luminar's homeworld, a place of crystal cities and floating gardens where beings of pure light had lived in harmony for millions of years. She saw their ships not built for war but for healing, spreading across the galaxy to help species in conflict. The Luminar had been explorers, teachers, and mediators. When two species fought over resources, the Luminar would show them how to share. When a civilization destroyed their environment, the Luminar would help them rebuild. When fear and hatred divided people, the Luminar would bridge the gap with understanding. But their greatest gift had also been their downfall. The Luminar could touch minds directly, sharing thoughts and emotions in ways that made lies impossible and prejudice meaningless. When they made contact with a species, that species inevitably began to question why some beings were considered superior to others. They began to ask uncomfortable questions about power, about fairness, about the right of the strong to rule over the weak. The ancient Galactic Council had watched their carefully maintained hierarchy crumble wherever the Luminar went. Species that had served as slaves for centuries began demanding freedom. Primitive worlds that had been kept primitive began developing their own technology. The natural order that kept the powerful in power was falling apart. So, they had declared the Luminar a threat to galactic stability. Sarah experienced the memory of the first attack as if she had been there herself. Luminar ships designed for peace had been defenseless against the Council's war fleets. The gentle beings had tried to communicate, to understand why they were being attacked, but the Council had already decided that extinction was the only solution. Almost all of the Luminar had died in that first assault. But the Council had kept one alive, the being that now slept beside Sarah. They had called it a research specimen. The torture that followed was methodical and scientific. Council researchers had studied the Luminar's ability to touch minds, learning exactly how their psychic powers worked. Then they had begun the long process of twisting those powers into something horrible. They had forced the Luminar to experience every form of fear and pain imaginable. They had shown it images of death and suffering until its natural instinct to heal became an instinct to hurt. They had conditioned it to associate its psychic touch with terror instead of comfort. But the worst part, Sarah realized, was that they had made sure the Luminar remembered what it used to be. Every time it was forced to drive someone insane, it knew it had once been a healer. Every time it broke a spirit, it remembered when it had mended broken hearts. The creature was trapped between what it had been and what it had been forced to become. They didn't just want a weapon, Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. They wanted you to suffer. They wanted you to hate yourself as much as others feared you. The Luminar stirred slightly at her words, and Sarah felt a wave of shame and self-hatred wash through their connection. Even now, after centuries of slavery, the creature blamed itself for the pain it had been forced to cause. No, Sarah said firmly, her hand pressing more securely against the creature's form. None of it was your fault. You were a victim, not a willing participant. They broke you and then used your broken pieces as tools. Through their bond, she began to push back against the conditioning. Sarah had no psychic powers of her own, but she had something the Council researchers had never possessed: genuine empathy. She couldn't undo centuries of trauma, but she could share her own memories of kindness, hope, and healing. She showed the Luminar images from Earth: children playing in parks, doctors healing the sick, teachers sharing knowledge freely. She shared memories of humans helping each other through disasters, of strangers becoming friends, of enemies learning to forgive. But most importantly, she showed the creature what she saw when she looked at it: not a monster, but a being worthy of love and respect. The Luminar's form began to change as Sarah's memories flowed through their connection. The harsh shadows softened into gentle twilight. The burning eyes dimmed to a warm glow. For moments at a time, its true form would shine through the darkness, a being of incredible beauty and grace. Like a living constellation, as the creature healed, Sarah began to understand something profound about humanity's place in the galaxy. They weren't the strongest species or the smartest or the most advanced, but they had something rare and precious: the ability to see past surface appearances to the truth underneath. Other species looked at the void spawn and saw only terror. Humans looked at the same creature and saw someone who needed help. Other species saw weakness in showing compassion. Humans saw it as strength. That's why they're afraid of us, Sarah realized aloud. Not because we're powerful, but because we see things differently. We look at their perfectly ordered galaxy and ask uncomfortable questions. Just like your people did. The Luminar's eyes opened. Not all at once, but slowly, like flowers blooming. For the first time in centuries, those eyes held hope instead of despair. Through their connection, Sarah felt the creature's gratitude. But she also felt something else: a growing strength. The Luminar was remembering its true nature, and with that memory came power. Not the twisted power to terrorize, but the original power to heal and inspire. You could change everything, Sarah said softly. If you're strong enough, if you're willing to try, you could show the galaxy what really happened here. You could share the truth the way your people used to share knowledge. The creature made a sound that was almost like a purr. Its massive form shifted, wrapping more protectively around Sarah, and she realized it was no longer hiding from its captors. It was shielding her from potential threats. High above them, alarms began blaring again. But these weren't warning about the void spawn's escape. These were summoning the full council to an emergency session. Word was spreading through the station and beyond. Something unprecedented was happening in the lower levels. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Species that had lived in fear of the void spawn for generations were suddenly experiencing strange dreams. Visions of truth, memories of the creature's real history, glimpses of what the galaxy could be like if it was built on cooperation instead of fear. The Luminar was finally strong enough to share its story. And through the psychic networks that connected many species, that story was spreading like wildfire. They're going to try to stop you, Sarah warned. The council won't want the truth to get out. The creature's form solidified slightly, becoming more defined and purposeful. When it spoke through their psychic connection, its voice was no longer broken and afraid. It was calm, wise, and absolutely determined. Let them try, the Luminar said, its mental voice like music after centuries of screams. I am no longer their weapon, and I am no longer alone. Sarah smiled and settled more comfortably against her new friend's protective bulk. No, she agreed. You're definitely not alone. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you gave a human and a healed Luminar a chance to work together. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. On Draknari military stations, hardened warriors stopped their training as strange visions filled their minds. They saw memories that weren't their own, images of a beautiful being of light being tortured and broken, transformed into the weapon they had feared for centuries. In the crystal cities of the Vorthak homeworld, the living crystalline beings felt their perfect structures crack, not from terror this time, but from shame as they realized they had been complicit in cosmic injustice for millennia. The Zephyrian hive mind experienced something unprecedented: individual thoughts. For the first time in their species' history, separate voices began asking separate questions about why they had never questioned the Council's version of events. Throughout the galaxy, species that had lived under the Council's rule for thousands of years were suddenly experiencing doubt. The psychic broadcast wasn't forcing them to believe anything. It was simply showing them the truth and letting them draw their own conclusions, and the conclusion most were reaching was that they had been lied to. In the council chambers, emergency sessions were being called every few minutes. Representatives who had fled in terror when the void spawn was released were now returning, but their attitudes had changed completely. "The creature is still loose," shouted the chief speaker, his metallic voice crackling with static and panic. "Why aren't our security forces containing it?" "Because it's not attacking anyone," replied Commander Thax, who had recovered from his encounter with the creature but looked shaken. "It's just sitting there." With the human, they appear to be having a conversation. On the main viewing screen, the assembled aliens could see Sarah Chen sitting comfortably beside the creature that had once been their ultimate weapon. The Luminar's form had continued to change, becoming less monster and more something else, something that looked almost familiar to species old enough to remember the ancient stories. "Impossible," whispered Ambassador Clix. "The void spawn cannot communicate. It knows only destruction." But even as he spoke, they could all see that the creature was very much communicating. Its form pulsed with gentle light as waves of psychic energy spread outward from the lower levels. Each pulse carried more memories, more truth, more questions that no one in power wanted to answer. "Sir," reported a technician, "we're receiving communications from across the galaxy. Hundreds of species are demanding explanations about the creature's origin. They want to know if the memories they're receiving are real." The chief speaker's form flickered as his energy patterns became unstable. "Cut off all communications! Jam the psychic broadcasts. We must maintain order." But it was too late. The truth was already out there, spreading from mind to mind across the galaxy. You couldn't jam telepathic communication, and you couldn't stop people from asking questions once they'd been awakened to the possibility that they'd been lied to. Down in the observation chamber, Sarah felt the Luminar's growing strength through their connection. The creature was no longer the broken weapon it had been forced to become. With each passing moment, more of its original nature was returning. "Are you strong enough to do what needs to be done?" Sarah asked quietly. The Luminar's response came not in words, but in feelings: determination, hope, and a deep desire to heal the wounds its captivity had helped create. "Then let's go introduce you properly to the Council," Sarah said, standing up and straightening her uniform. "I think it's time they met the real you." Together they made their way through the station's corridors. Word of their approach spread ahead of them, but instead of the usual screaming and panic, something different happened. Aliens who saw them approaching didn't flee in terror. They stopped and stared in wonder. The creature moving beside the human looked nothing like the void spawn of nightmares. Oh, it was still massive and clearly powerful, but its form now radiated peace instead of terror. Light flowed across its surface like aurora, and its presence felt calming rather than threatening. Some of the older aliens began to remember stories their grandparents had told them, legends of the bright ones who had once traveled between the stars, bringing healing wherever they went. Stories they had assumed were just myths. By the time Sarah and the Luminar reached the council chambers, word had spread throughout the station. Instead of an empty hall, they found it packed with representatives from dozens of species, all wanting to see for themselves what had become of their ultimate weapon. The chief speaker stood at his podium, trying to maintain order as arguments broke out across the chamber. "The creature has clearly been compromised," he was saying. "Some form of human mind control must be responsible for its change in behavior." "With respect," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber as she and the Luminar entered. That's not what happened at all. The hall fell silent. Every eye, organic and artificial, focused on the human and her impossible companion. Sarah walked calmly to the center of the chamber, the Luminar flowing gracefully beside her. When they reached the middle of the room, the creature settled into a comfortable position, wrapping its form protectively around Sarah like a living cloak of starlight. Honorable Council members, Sarah began, I'd like you to meet the Luminar. I believe some of you may remember its people from the old stories. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The name Luminar hadn't been spoken in official council records for over 1,000 years, but it appeared in the ancient myths of almost every species present. The Luminar died out centuries ago, protested Ambassador Clix, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. No, Sarah replied gently. You captured the last one and spent centuries torturing it into becoming your weapon. But torture doesn't change what someone truly is. It only buries it under layers of pain. The creature beside her pulsed with soft light, and suddenly every mind in the chamber was filled with memories. Not the violent psychic assault they expected, but a gentle sharing of truth. They experienced the Luminar's capture, its torture, its transformation into the void spawn. But they also experienced its healing, its return to its true nature, and its desire to build something better. You wanted to teach humanity our place in the galaxy, Sarah continued, her voice remaining steady even as aliens around her wept or cried out in shame. Consider the lesson delivered. Our place is beside anyone who suffers, offering comfort to those in pain, and showing even the most broken souls that they are worthy of love. The Luminar's psychic voice joined with Sarah's spoken words, and together, they painted a vision of what the galaxy could become, not a hierarchy based on fear and power, but a community built on cooperation and mutual respect, not strong species ruling over weak ones, but all beings working together to help each other grow. It was the same message the Luminar's people had carried centuries ago, the same message that had so threatened the Council's power structure that they had committed genocide to silence it. But now it was being shared again, and this time it was backed by the moral authority of a being who had suffered greatly and chosen forgiveness over revenge. Across the chamber, representatives were making choices. Some of the older council members, too invested in the current system to change, tried to argue for maintaining order, but they were increasingly outnumbered by voices calling for reform, for justice, for a complete restructuring of galactic civilization. The Dreknari military, discovering that their warrior culture had been built on lies and artificial fear, began questioning their entire way of life. The Zephyrian collective experienced the joy of individual creativity for the first time. Even some of the proud Vorthak began to crack their crystalline shells, literally and figuratively, as they embraced the possibility of change. And at the center of it all sat Sarah Chen and the Luminar, human and ancient being, working together to heal wounds that had festered for millennia. You used pain as a tool of control, Sarah said, addressing the old guard directly. But pain shared is pain halved, and joy shared is joy doubled. We're offering you a choice. Continue trying to rule through fear or join us in building something better. The Luminar added its voice to hers, not in threat, but in invitation. The creature that had been designed to break spirits was instead offering to heal them. It would take time, centuries perhaps, to undo all the damage that had been done. But as Sarah looked around the chamber at aliens who were seeing each other as equals for the first time, she felt hope. The beast that was supposed to intimidate the galaxy had indeed curled up beside a human and slept. But when it woke up, it hadn't remained a beast at all. It had remembered how to be a healer, and the galaxy would never be the same.